Hi everyone, I'm Barbara Holzapfel, VP Education at Microsoft. Thank you so much for joining me today. 2020 is often spoken of as the year when everything changed in education. Educators, students, and parents all had to adapt and learn how to navigate new approaches. We wanted to listen to students, teachers, and system leaders and learn from their experiences so that we can continue to support them as they reimagine learning. In December 2020, we partnered with YouGov to find out what teachers and students in the US, the UK, and in India felt about their experiences with remote and hybrid learning. And in March 2021, we worked with Harvard Business Review Analytics Services to gather the unique perspectives of sociologists, psychologists, molecular biologists, and other experts for the paper, The Class of COVID-19, Lessons of Today and Learning for Tomorrow. The results of both studies highlighted that there continues to be a lot of uncertainty about the effects of the last 1.5 years, as well as the opportunity to move education forward. There's also a growing sense of optimism that the events of the pandemic can lead to positive change in education. In fact, looking into 2021, teachers and students report that though they're cautious about the future, they're also optimistic. Feelings of optimism almost doubled for both groups when thinking about 2021 versus 2020. And molecular biologist John Medina, who was consulted for the Class of COVID paper, says that despite the negative effects of stress that students have experienced, the 86 billion neurons in the brain are capable of developing new connections and literally rebooting, allowing the opportunity for growth, learning, and self-discovery. He adds that the brain is built for stress, but hates feeling out of control. So to help students feel more in control of their learning, educators can create environments that foster well-being, safety, and quality teaching for all students. The overall takeaway from these two studies is that as we move forward, a holistic approach of supporting students is needed. And it has a couple of key elements to it. It needs to be student-centric, it needs to be skills-focused, social learning needs to be embedded, it needs to be safe and secure, and it needs to be scalable. And today, we're going to focus on the first three elements that provide immediate opportunities to support student well-being and learning and create durable, positive changes in education: student centricity, skills focus, and social emotional learning. These three elements have always been important in education, but they now take on a very different meaning and require different efforts to support them than in the pre-pandemic world. Student-centric approaches have been shown to improve learning, promote social and emotional growth, and increase technical skills. And we know that student well-being is critical to learning, so fostering well-being for all students is all about being student-centric. Teachers were asked to select what knowledge they most needed to support student well-being in remote learning. And on this slide, we see the top responses with the percentage of teachers who listed each of them in the top three. So teachers most wanted to understand what motivates their students, what complexities they might face in their broader lives at home and in the context of their families and communities, and what their emotional state is. Students said that what would make remote learning better for them is more one-on-one time with the teachers, active and engaging learning opportunities, more small group collaboration, and being able to learn at their own pace. So it was really important for us to understand what the students themselves were thinking about their experience in remote learning. Cassandra Davis, who is one of the experts consulted for the Class of COVID paper and who is one of our guests in our panel later on, suggests that as students return to the classroom, relaxing rules such as dress codes, minimizing homework loads, and overlooking some absences can lessen the stress and provide spaces for students to recover as they come back to the classroom. And John Medina suggests that creating situations where students can feel more in control, such as self-directed assignments, can contribute to the positive effects of student-centered approaches. So putting the student at the center and giving them control over their own learning. As we move on to skills, we've seen that some students have navigated the challenges of remote and hybrid learning more easily than others. But what were the skills that were most helpful for students in remote and hybrid learning? Teachers and students both highlighted the ability to work independently, attention control, and technology skills as the skills that help students navigate hybrid and remote learning best. And these skills directly relate to the skills most in demand by employers. Additionally, experts noted that after a year of remote and hybrid learning, students have enhanced digital literacy and proficiency with virtual interactions and collaboration and other software tools. And they suggest that integrating some of the technologies used during the remote and hybrid learning time into in-person classrooms can help the students continue to develop these skills and enhance their learning. We've always known that learning is a social activity. The more we collaborate with others, the more we learn. Students shared that in remote learning, they missed the break time with friends, the unstructured collaboration and interactions with their classmates, the energy that is in a physical classroom and in physical spaces as students interact, and working face-to-face with the teachers. So as students return to in-person classes, they also need to be proactively preparing for heightened levels of anxiety and potentially depression among their students who have been in remote and hybrid settings for a long time now. And there are strategies that can lower the cognitive load and can help lessen these feelings. Experts suggest that strengthening emotional intelligence with programs such as Ruler, which was created by Mark Brackett, who is also one of our panelists later on, helps students better understand and manage their own emotions. In addition, especially since students have been remote now for almost a year and a half, encouraging social experiences through cooperation and collaboration in the classroom, still with the aid of technologies such as Microsoft Teams, or doing mindfulness exercises, which again can be done in a group setting with an immersive experience such as Mindful Night in Minecraft Education Edition, bring students together and have them collaborate on common projects. Education is a very powerful force that drives us toward a better future, and technology has been instrumental in facilitating the recent transformation in learning that we've seen just happen in front of our eyes over the last 18 months. More than half of the teachers surveyed said that during remote learning, they improved their ability to use technology effectively for teaching. And experts recognize that keeping focus on project-based, self-guided and exploratory learning facilitated by technology can lead to deeper learning and better retention for students. Our white paper, Immersive Experiences, Mixed Realities, presented evidence that self-directed immersive experiences, such as those in Minecraft, helped students improve test scores by as much as 22% in a period of weeks. And there are a number of technologies that have become critical in supporting pedagogy. The first one is collaborative environments, which are key to keeping the students engaged in their learning. Assessment tools and analytics provide the critical insights on student progress to the teachers so that they can personalize the learning experience for their students. Inclusive learning tools and immersive experience support equity and deeper understanding of complex concepts, because we want to make sure that we can bring more students and keep more students in the education journey. So inclusiveness is a really critical part of this. Features like the immersive reader help students of all abilities, and new additions like reading progress allow students to practice skills on their own, again, also giving them more control over their learning. And all of these technologies are delivered through devices that promote mobility, durability, accessibility, security, and scalability across many different students in your district or in your system. There are still many questions with no easy answers that education leaders are considering. As we continue to reimagine learning, student well-being is the most important focus of all efforts, and everything, including technology, need to support that. The need to transition rapidly to remote learning at scale caused disruptions for students, teachers, and parents all around the world. COVID-19 caused the convergence of three crises: a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and in many parts of the world, a humanitarian crisis. To dig deeper into ways to support all students as they work to acclimate to new circumstances and create positive, durable changes in education, we have two experts with us, Cassandra Davis and Mark Brackett. Cassandra and Mark are both engaged in different ways of helping students recover from the disruptions of the past year. Dr. Davis is a research professor in the Department of Public Policy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her research focuses on the environmental disruptions of schooling, specifically the impact of natural disasters on low-income communities of color. Dr. Mark Brackett is the founder and director of the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence and a professor in the Child Studies Center of Yale University. He's the lead developer of Ruler, an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that's been adopted by nearly 2,000 pre-K through high school schools across the United States and in other countries. I'd also like to start hearing a little bit more about each of your work. Cassandra, let's start with you. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how it led you to what you're working on?
So yes, thank you so much for allowing me to be here to be a part of this fantastic conversation about COVID in our schools and our students. So my name is Cassandra Davis. I'm a research professor in the Department of Public Policy at UNC Chapel Hill. Some of my work really focuses on the ways in which that natural disasters, are impacting our schooling community. I define schooling community as the educators, the students, and their families. So everyone that is situated around our school, in my definition, is a schooling community. So some of my work, what we're finding, a major finding, is that although schools do a great job at supporting their students after a disaster, we really could improve in supporting our educators. We're finding that oftentimes we're interested in the social emotional well-being of our students, but we leave behind our educators. Particularly when we look at low income and communities of color, we see that the disasters kind of exacerbate already pre-existing conditions. So it isn't shocking that we find that teacher turnover rates are so much higher in those spaces as well. So yeah, so that's part of a major thing that I focus on.
Thank you for that introduction, and we'll go deeper in just a few minutes. Mark, tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing.
Sure. By way of introduction, I'm a professor of psychology in the Child Studies Center at Yale, and I run the Center for Emotional Intelligence. I've also authored a book called Permission to Feel, which is about my work running around the world for the last 25 years, trying to understand why people struggle with their feelings and especially talking about their emotions. And Cassandra, I think we do the same work because pretty much what we have found is that we need more focus on the adults who are raising and teaching kids to be the best possible role models for children in schools. And so over the last year during the pandemic, we've launched a number of studies looking at teacher health and wellness. And we call them the equity and well-being studies because we're looking at teachers in a more equitable way across the United States. As we know, most teachers in the United States are white women. And so we wanted to get a representative sample of African-American Black teachers as well as Latinx teachers to understand the emotional lives of our educators. And what we're finding, as you might imagine, is that anxiety is rampant across the United States, that teachers are feeling anxious, they're overwhelmed, they're exhausted, they are in many ways burnt out. And I think what's very interesting to me is that early in the pandemic, we asked teachers how they wanted to feel. And they were just saying things like, I want to feel happy again, I want to feel excited. And more recently in our research, what they're saying is, I just want to feel appreciated as a human being. And so my first take home is we need to find ways to make sure that our teachers feel valued and appreciated.
That's a wonderful introduction, Mark. Thank you for that. So Cassandra, you mentioned in your introduction of how you're looking to help the schools and systems recover, especially from environmental disruptions, and your focus on low-income communities and communities of color. And so, can you share a little bit more what you've seen, especially over the last 16 months, of the impact of COVID, and particularly the dynamics that you've seen in the most vulnerable communities?
So I'm working on one of my projects. I'm working with Dr. Stacy Overstreet, who's at Tulane University, and the team administered a survey to educators who were returning back to school at COVID. So this was right around the fall. And the purpose of that is really to assess how educators were feeling upon, coming back to school with COVID and not really have seen their students since March or February the year before. And our findings were really surprising. As we know, that the majority of educators in the US happen to be white females, but we really saw differences in self-efficacy when we looked at Black educators versus white educators. We saw that our findings suggested that Black educators were a little bit more confident in returning to the classroom versus their peers. And they spoke about, addressing the whole child. Where we saw that white educators were really focused on looking at the academics and looking at, kind of this idea of teaching to the test and how are we going to be prepared when we come back. Black educators were talking about, hey, we've been through worse. We've been through Katrina. What's this COVID? So just as one example, I don't want to say that, Black educators as a whole are super confident or ready to roll with COVID. That's not what I want to get across here. But it was a really interesting finding, particularly in New Orleans, but to see the differences in self-efficacy based on race from our educators. So that's probably one of the things that was most pressing finding that we've noticed in differences in educator responses for preparation in coming back to school.
Yeah, that's super interesting insight, and kind of the notion of how do you build different resilience and different ways of addressing natural disasters, be it a pandemic or other disasters. And Mark, you alluded to it in your introduction, your book Permission to Feel, as well as the Ruler program, that really help people, irrespective of age, understand and to respond to their own emotions in a sort of considerate and conscious way. And what are some of the things that you've seen, especially over the last 16 months? And you talked about it in your introduction, especially in the sense of for the teachers. What are the things that you think educators should start doing, stop doing, continue doing to support themselves as well as to support the students?
That's a big question, Barbara. So I think the first, goes back to the basic title, of our work, which is we have to give ourselves the permission to feel our feelings. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of toxic positivity in the education system, right? Teachers believe they have to show up and be bright and excited and, and jubilant and ecstatic, even during the most difficult times. And yes, of course, we want our teachers to be happier, but realistically, there's a lot of anxiety in the world right now. And we have to give our teachers the permission to be anxious because that's the way they feel. And I think importantly, we need to provide them with strategies. As we know from our research, most people have not had an adequate emotion education. Most people can't define these concepts of emotional intelligence or the concepts of emotion regulation. And what we've learned over the years is that teachers are really desperate for strategies to support their own well-being. So for example, just working on their self-talk is a very simple strategy, going from self-criticism and catastrophizing to being more self-compassionate. That's a big deal that we need to make sure that we can support educators in those strategies, taking better care of themselves. Some people say self-care is selfish. We say it's the opposite, right? Setting personal goals for our well-being is critically important because we want to be those role models for our children. And so healthy emotion regulation is where we're spending a lot of time right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about the notion of toxic positivity and how, sort of really doing that balance of self-reflection and giving yourself that space as a teacher, as a student, and to then be able to model that for the students. That's super powerful. And of course, to also give the teachers the tools to actually do that. And Cassandra, in your work and in the context that we just looked at, what are some of the things that you've seen work well at the student, at the teacher, as well as the system level to reduce some of the negative impacts to the most vulnerable populations?
Well, so what I can speak to is that some of our findings, we conducted the study was funded by the National Science Foundation a few years ago, where we looked at the impact of Hurricanes Matthew that hit in 2016, Hurricanes Harvey that hit in 2017, and Hurricanes Florence that hit in 2018. Some things that we noticed is that back to kind of what Mark said, that they were absolutely impacted by these storms, where they had lost their clothing, they had lost their resources within the schools, outside of the schools, that they were dealing with homelessness in their own spaces, and really trying to suppress their feelings and put on the happy faces if everything's okay. The educators were talking about, we are struggling, but we really need to see our principals, our superintendents, just be transparent and have a moment when they are being honest and reflective about their spaces. That will then kind of help us understand that, what I'm feeling is okay, it's accurate. Then I can really kind of identify what's needed and then get the resources and hopefully gain the resources that are needed. We're in this hurricane called COVID right now. Who knows when the storm is over? But hopefully our educators will know, which I'm sure that the teachers are already there. Hopefully our educators will know that just because COVID is over doesn't mean that everything can go back to the way it is. I imagine we're going to be in this space of recovery for years, depending on what type of resources and access that you get, especially for our communities in higher need, our social marginalized communities. That recovery period will be a very long time. And so what are the ways in which that we can provide resources to hopefully reduce that time?
Mark, from the work that you've seen and seeing the discussions around the widening achievement gap and those discussions as we come out of a year of school closures, talk to us a little bit more about how you look at the topic of the achievement gap in the context of emotional well-being, social emotional skills at the teacher and student level.
It's an important question. And I want to just piggyback on Cassandra's point first, which is we did a study during COVID and pre-COVID on the emotional intelligence of principals and what the impact that was on teachers, burnout, attrition, sense of creativity, and well-being. And I think, interestingly, you can take this work and you can look at it from the self-regulation abilities, right? Does Mark, the leader, have the ability to manage his feelings? And then you can look at it from the interpersonal piece. Does Mark support his team, in dealing with their stress? And interestingly enough, what we found during the pandemic was that teachers were doing better in schools when there was a leader who had that self-regulation ability. They really wanted that role model. Whereas pre-pandemic, they were looking more for the teacher who was, supportive of their wellness. And I just think that's really interesting that during times of crisis, we want to look to that leader and say, yes, you have that ability to take care of yourself, which means that you're going to be able to help us too. And to me, that relates directly to the question, which is, from our perspective, a stressed out teacher is an equity problem, right? Because what we know is that when teachers are burnt out and when they're stressed, their instruction is different, their energy in the classroom is different. And so again, a big focus of ours is to make sure that our educators are feeling prepared when they return to that classroom, that they feel, interestingly enough, just like the kids we did a big study with high schoolers. The number one hoped for feeling was psychologically safe. And we know the implications of when you feel psychologically unsafe. And so point is, we want to make sure our teachers are psychologically safe, that they feel supported. And then secondly, we want to make sure that our kids feel psychologically safe upon return.
The notion of psychological safety is a critical one, right? In terms of how do you bring all the constituents together and create that environment where everybody can learn. And Cassandra, from what you've seen, and as you look to the future, what is a call to action that you would like to put to the participants of the ISTE conference at the leader level, at the teacher level, as we move forward?
So my call to action is that we really get real with our next steps, and that we really take a serious look at ourselves and as our community and as a nation. And what will 2022 be like? Will we be happy with this idea of a term that I am struggling with right now, recovery, right? Like, if I am already in a bad situation, a disaster happens, is recovery me going back to my bad situation? Mm-hmm. I don't agree with that. And so we really have to think, what does recovery look like post-COVID for our communities of color, for our low-income communities? I'm talking about rural communities. I'm talking about undocumented immigrant communities. I'm talking about BIPOC communities, Indigenous communities. I'm talking about all of these different spaces, and that we as a nation cannot be complacent with recovering and going back to the way things were, but really challenging where we're at and disrupting and forcing some change. So I guess my call to action is, this is such a professor thing to say, but do some homework, right? Like, do some reading, but really get a sense of where we're at so that we know where we're going to go.
Love that. And such a powerful statement to say, look, there's an opportunity here as well to drive, an education system, an education approach that is more equitable, that is more inclusive. And thank you for the time today. And thanks for all the thoughts that you shared.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was fun to be with you.
Thank you so much, Cassandra and Mark, for sharing your insights and experience with us today. Your work is increasing the well-being for untold members of the student community. And my sincere thanks to the teachers, educators, staff, and parents all around the world for continuing to guide students through the challenges and changes. Microsoft is honored to be a partner on this journey, and we will continue listening and learning from your experiences and supporting your efforts to create positive, durable change for better learning outcomes for all students. Thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today, and once again, our sincere thanks to Cassandra and Mark for joining us and sharing their insights. I hope you will all enjoy the great sessions throughout the conference, and thanks again for being with us today.